I actually spent 6 or 7 years in Detroit. So that's where the automotive industry moved out of the city, and the population went down by 60%. Different reasons, nothing to do with birth rate, but the same underlying factors. You're
Hmm.
right, and
What
the
did
city went
life in
bankrupt.
Detroit look like then?
Yeah, so well, you had a very contrasting situation. You had the suburbs of Detroit, which were really isolated from this, because people effectively who were able to moved away from the city because the city was just somewhere. It was like a war zone, and it's I say that, and I think people who experienced it would probably agree with me. If you look at the photographs of street after street with houses that were just crumbling. So what happens, and this will happen everywhere, because when you have shrinking populations, that means you have excess housing. Excess housing, doesn't it's not like everybody on the east side of the city kind of you know fades away first, and you still got the buzzing west side of the city and the north side, etc. No, it's fragmented parts of the city. If you take a street, it'll be one apartment is empty and a buyer can't be found, and then another house across the street, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And then you'll get buildings where half of the apartments are vacant and not maintained. And then you'll find that, well, the taxes to maintain that street aren't being paid. So the city can't afford to kind of repair the streets. In the case of Detroit, when I was there more than 10 years ago, there was this campaign to try and count the number of streetlights that were not working. Count, not fix them. The city simply did not know the situation about how many streetlights were working and not. And one of the problems in counting streetlights was that you had to go to streets at nighttime. And these were streets that were incredibly dangerous to go to. There was crime in these streets. There was horrendous crime going on. So people didn't want to go out. Workers didn't want to go out at nighttime to figure out, are the lights working or not? So the city didn't even know which lights were working and which ones weren't. So these are problems that start to unfold. That really, I think people have imagined that cities are going to just naturally shrink in some way. That I do get comments that brings a smile to my face, because it's natural to think that there are positives to this. It's like, oh, it's going to be so much easier to get a parking spot, or I'm not going to have to line up, whatever. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. Stores will close, coffee shops will close, parking spots won't be maintained. It's going to be just as difficult as ever to we'll still compress ourselves into parts of cities that are safe, that are growing, whilst other parts of the cities fall away. So there will be, to just broaden it a little bit, there will be what I'm describing as magnet cities, magnet towns, or magnet suburbs, the few suburbs that people still do gravitate towards, and it will be younger people gravitate towards these. So there will be some cool spot where still there are new things happening. There's new stores opening. There's still things to do at nighttime. It feels safe there, but those will be relatively expensive areas. So
Hmm.
older retired people won't be able to move there quite as easily. They'll be left in the decaying areas. Not all young people will be able to afford these cooler areas, but those areas in time as well will start to fragment, because as population keeps going down again, as you said, this is kind of like a spiral that keeps going on and on and on. If you are a city and you've got 5 or 10 cool suburbs, 10 years from now, well, that number's always going to go down and down and down and down. That's the
Hmm.
difference to Detroit and all of this. Detroit solved its problem because in time the population stabilized. So it went through several decades of shrinkage, and then it flattened out, and it then was able to work a way out of its troubles. And it's doing this, become a very cool city. It's great to see. And what they're now able to do is return many of those streets to parkland. They're introducing waterways that where streets used to be, but you can't do that in areas where there's continual never ending population decline, or at least it's not as easy. And that's what we're talking about here, because until birth rates go back up to that 2.1 number, until that point, this will never end. And as you say, nations have never been known to come out of this other than if it's through it. People say, well, what happened just after the war? They bounced back up, or after the Wall Street crash, they bounced back up. There are moments of time, short blips of time, where societies hadn't re-engineered themselves. The difference today is societies have re-engineered themselves for us to think more of having children in our 30s, and a third of us are ending up childless. Until we solve that problem, this will never end.